One night, after too much wine, a powerful king made a promise in front of his entire court, a promise that started as a joke, but changed his life in a way no one could have expected. Where that promise led him is something you'll never forget. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and why you enjoy stories like this one. In the grand hall of Sigishora Castle, torches blazed against stone walls as laughter echoed through the night. King Vladislav Dragomir stood tall among his knights, his handsome features illuminated by firelight, a golden goblet clutched in his strong hand. At 39, he was in his prime, broad-shouldered, with piercing blue eyes and dark hair that fell to his shoulders. The kingdom of Wallachia trembled at his command, yet tonight, like most nights, he surrendered himself to wine. "My lords!" he bellowed, silencing the hall with his powerful voice. Wine sloshed over the rim of his cup as he gestured grandly. "Am I not the most feared king in all the land?" "Yes, your majesty," came the chorus of replies, knights and nobles eager to please their unpredictable ruler. Vladislav's eyes narrowed as he scanned the room, his balance wavering slightly. And yet you all think I cannot surprise you anymore?" He laughed, a deep rumble that carried a hint of danger. "I shall prove you wrong." A hush fell over the gathering. The king's impulsive nature was legendary, and his drunken declarations often led to consequences that reverberated throughout the kingdom. "I make a wager," he announced, his voice booming across the hall. "I swear by my crown and my honor that I shall marry the next woman who walks through those doors." Gasps erupted from the assembled nobility. Count Radu, the king's closest advisor, stepped forward cautiously. "Your Majesty, perhaps—" "Silence!" Vladislav roared. "I have spoken. My word is law. The next woman, be she noble or common, young or old, beautiful or plain, she shall be my queen." The assembled crowd exchanged nervous glances. Some began to whisper, wondering if any lady of the court might be persuaded to enter at just the right moment. Others silently prayed no woman would enter at all until the king's drunken fancy had passed. But fate had other plans. The massive oak doors creaked open, and a hush fell over the hall. There, framed in the doorway, stood a woman unlike any the court expected to see. Anicia Kohokaru was 37 years old and considerably overweight, her full figure draped in simple homespun cloth. Her round face was flushed from the climb up the castle steps, and in her arms, she carried a basket filled with fresh herbs. "I've brought the medicines Master Theodore requested," she announced, her voice faltering as she realized she had interrupted something significant. The silence was deafening. Then came the first snicker, followed by another, until nervous laughter rippled through the assembly. Someone whispered, "The king's bride," and the laughter grew louder. But Vladislav did not laugh. His eyes suddenly cleared despite the alcohol clouding his judgment, fixed on Anicia. There was something in her gaze, a quiet dignity, a steadiness that seemed to cut through the mockery surrounding her. She stood straighter under his scrutiny, neither cowering nor fleeing. "Come forward," the king commanded, his voice unexpectedly soft. Anicia approached, her steps measured and calm. The laughter died away as the court realized the king was not joining in their mockery. "What is your name?" Vladislav asked, studying her face. "Anicia Kohokaru, your majesty. I grow herbs for the royal physician." "Do you know what I just proclaimed, Anicia Kohokaru?" She shook her head, clutching her basket tighter. "I swore to marry the next woman who entered this hall." He gestured around at the stunned faces. "These fine lords thought me jesting. Did you think I jest?" "I would not presume to know your majesty's mind," she answered carefully, meeting his gaze with surprising composure. A slow smile spread across Vladislav's face. Wise words. He turned to address the hall. "Behold your new queen." The silence was absolute. Then Count Radu stepped forward again. "Sire, surely you cannot mean to—" "Do you question my honor, Radu?" The king's voice turned dangerous. "I gave my word. I am a man of my word. Is that not why the people fear and respect me?" No one dared contradict him. Vladislav turned back to Anicia, who stood with remarkable stillness, her expression betraying nothing of the storm that must have been raging within. "Will you accept my hand, woman of the herbs?" he asked, a hint of challenge in his voice. In that moment, something passed between them, an unspoken understanding. She was being offered a role in a game she hadn't asked to play, yet to refuse the king was unthinkable. "I accept, your majesty," she replied, her voice steady. Without hesitation, Vladislav summoned the castle priest. The ceremony was brief, conducted amid shocked whispers and disbelieving stares. Throughout it all, Anicia maintained her composure, speaking her vows clearly while the king swayed slightly, still gripping his wine goblet. When it was done, Vladislav kissed her hand with surprising gentleness, then turned to the assembly with triumph blazing in his eyes. "The deed is done. Honor my queen as you would honor me." He raised his goblet high, drained it in one long swallow, then staggered slightly. "The celebration continues," he declared, before signaling to a servant for more wine. The music resumed hesitantly, but the mood had shifted irrevocably. Anicia stood beside the king, now her husband, watching as he returned to his revelry. None dared approach her, either to congratulate or condemn. She was alone in a sea of hostile faces, yet she betrayed no fear. When dawn arrived, Vladislav was carried unconscious to his chambers by his guards. Anicia was escorted to a separate chamber, as befitted a new queen who had yet to properly join her husband. She sat on the edge of a bed finer than any she had ever known, hands folded in her lap, waiting for the morning to reveal what her new life would bring. The king awoke with a groan as sunlight pierced through the chamber windows. His head pounded mercilessly, his mouth dry as dust. Fragments of the previous night flashed through his mind: the wager, the woman, the hasty ceremony. "Tell me it was a dream," he muttered to his manservant, who was already preparing a tonic for his master's headache. "I'm afraid not, your majesty," the servant replied cautiously. "You married the herb woman, Anicia Kohokaru. She awaits your summons in the east chamber." Vladislav sat up, wincing at the pain the movement caused. "Bring her to me," he commanded. When Anicia entered, she wore the same simple clothes as the night before. She carried herself with quiet dignity, making no attempt to appear as anything other than what she was. "So it's true," the king said, studying her in the harsh light of day. "I've taken a herb woman for my queen." "You have, your majesty," she replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. He expected to see gloating, or perhaps fear in her eyes. Instead, he found only acceptance, a quiet strength that gave him pause. "Many would expect me to annul this marriage immediately," he said, watching her carefully. "What your majesty chooses to do is his right," she answered simply. Vladislav laughed suddenly, surprising himself. "You don't beg for your position. You don't weep at the prospect of returning to your herbs." "The herbs have been good to me, sire. They have healing in them." A small smile touched her lips. "Perhaps more healing than a crown." The king stared at her, intrigued despite himself. Then something stubborn and mischievous flickered in his eyes. "No," he declared. "I think not. My word was given, and I shall stand by it." His lips curved into a smile that was part defiance, part amusement. "You shall remain my queen, Anicia Kohokaru. Let us see how the court adapts to that reality." It was a decision made partly from pride, partly from a desire to shock his pompous nobles. Yet as Anicia bowed her head in acceptance, Vladislav felt something unexpected, a flicker of curiosity about this woman who faced a king's whim with such composure. "So be it," she said simply. Neither could have imagined how profoundly that decision would transform them both. News of King Vladislav's impulsive marriage spread through the kingdom of Wallachia like wildfire. By midday, every noble house in Sigashora knew that their fearsome ruler had wed an overweight herb woman in a drunken spectacle. The whispers in the castle corridors were relentless. "She must have bewitched him," Lady Elena muttered to her companions as they watched Anicia cross the courtyard below. "No man, especially not our king, would choose such a woman otherwise." "It won't last," Count Radu assured the assembled council members later that afternoon. "His Majesty will come to his senses once the wine fully leaves his blood." But to everyone's astonishment, Vladislav showed no signs of annulling the marriage. When the royal chamberlain tentatively suggested preparing documents to dissolve the union, the king's response was immediate and forceful. "You question my decision?" Vladislav's voice was dangerously soft as he leaned forward in his throne. "Perhaps you'd prefer a king who changes his mind with every passing breeze? A king whose word means nothing?" The chamberlain backed away, bowing repeatedly. "Of course not, Your Majesty. Forgive my presumption." Vladislav watched with satisfaction as the man scurried away. There was something oddly enjoyable about upending the carefully maintained order of his court. Let them whisper, let them squirm. Meanwhile, Anesia moved through the castle with quiet purpose. She made no attempt to adopt the airs of nobility, nor did she shrink from her unexpected position. When the servants hesitated to obey her requests, uncertain of her authority, she simply took matters into her own hands. One morning, the kitchen staff found her grinding herbs in their domain, preparing medicines with the same focus she had always shown. "Your Majesty," the head cook stammered, "this is no place for a queen. Allow us to—" "I've worked with these hands all my life," Anesia replied without looking up. "They don't know how to be idle now." Word of this exchange reached Vladislav as he held court. He smiled to himself, imagining the consternation his unexpected queen was causing. That evening, he requested her presence at dinner, something he had not done since their marriage 3 days prior. The great hall fell silent as Anesia entered, dressed in a simple blue gown that castle seamstresses had hastily prepared. It did little to disguise her full figure, but the color brought warmth to her face and highlighted the rich chestnut of her hair. "Come," Vladislav commanded, gesturing to the empty seat beside him. "Let my queen take her rightful place." The nobles watched with thinly veiled disdain as Anesia approached the high table. She moved with deliberate grace, neither hurrying nor hesitating. When she sat beside the king, she did so without flourish, as if she had done so 100 times before. "Are you enjoying the comforts of castle life, my queen?" Vladislav asked loudly enough for nearby courtiers to hear. "The bed is softer than I'm accustomed to," she replied honestly. "I find I sleep less soundly on feathers than on straw." The king laughed, genuinely amused by her candor. "Perhaps we should stuff your royal mattress with hay then. That would scandalize your household even more than they already are," she observed quietly, a hint of humor in her eyes. Vladislav studied her, intrigued by the subtle wit. "You notice much. When people look through you rather than at you, Your Majesty, you learn to observe carefully." Their conversation continued in this vein throughout the meal, honest exchanges that lacked the usual courtly artifice. Several times, Vladislav found himself genuinely laughing, not the performative chuckle he typically employed in public, but a genuine sound of amusement. After the meal, as musicians played and courtiers mingled, Vladislav noticed Lady Mirella, one of the court's renowned beauties, approaching with determination in her eyes. "Your Majesty," she purred, sinking into a deep curtsy that displayed her considerable charms, "might I offer my congratulations on your marriage?" Her eyes flicked dismissively toward Anesia. "You may," Vladislav replied coolly, "though I suspect congratulations are not truly what you came to offer." Lady Mirella's smile faltered slightly. "I merely wish to assure you that your loyal subjects understand the political necessities that sometimes dictate a monarch's actions." "Political necessities?" The king's eyebrow arched dangerously. "Surely this union serves some strategic purpose." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "The court understands that a king has other needs that might be fulfilled elsewhere." Vladislav's eyes hardened. He had bedded Lady Mirella once, months ago, and clearly she harbored hopes of becoming his mistress. In the past, he might have accepted her thinly veiled offer. Now, something in him rebelled at the suggestion. "My queen," he called, gesturing Anesia to his side. She approached calmly, her eyes taking in the tableau before her. "Lady Mirella was just expressing her understanding of our marriage. She believes it must be a union of convenience, with my true affections lying elsewhere." Anesia regarded the beautiful noblewoman with steady eyes. How fortunate His Majesty is to have subjects so concerned with his happiness." Lady Morella flushed crimson, unable to detect any sarcasm in Anisia's tone, yet feeling the sting nonetheless. "Indeed," Vladislav agreed, his smile sharp as a blade, "though I find that true happiness often comes from unexpected quarters." He took Anisia's hand with deliberate care. "You may leave us, Lady Morella." The noblewoman retreated, humiliation evident in every step. Whispers followed her across the hall. "You didn't need to embarrass her," Anisia said quietly once they were relatively alone. "She sought to embarrass you," Vladislav countered. "I am beyond embarrassment, Your Majesty. I know what I am." The king studied her face, struck again by her composure. "And what is that?" "A simple woman in an extraordinary situation," she replied, "one that cannot last forever." Vladislav frowned. "You still believe I'll cast you aside?" "Wouldn't any reasonable person expect it?" Their eyes held for a long moment. Finally, the king spoke, his voice unusually sincere. "I've rarely been accused of being reasonable, my queen." Later that night, as Anisia prepared for bed in her chambers, a servant arrived with a small package. "From His Majesty," the young girl explained, setting it on the bed before departing. Inside, Anisia found a small sack of dried lavender and a note in a strong, slashing hand. "For your pillow. Perhaps this will help you sleep as soundly as you did on straw." Anisia smiled, touched by the unexpected thoughtfulness. She sprinkled the fragrant herbs inside her pillowcase and slept more peacefully than she had since entering the castle. In the coming days, a curious rhythm developed. Anisia continued her work with herbs, now in a small chamber allocated for her use. Servants began bringing her the sick or injured from among their ranks, and word of her healing touch spread throughout the castle. Vladislav watched from a distance, observing how she moved through the castle with quiet purpose. He found himself looking forward to their evening conversations, her straightforward perspective a refreshing change from the calculated flattery of his court. At a council meeting, when Baron Dragos suggested once more that the marriage be annulled, Vladislav slammed his fist on the table. "Enough," he roared. "The next man who questions my choice of queen will find himself stationed at our most distant border fortress for the remainder of his days." The council chamber fell silent, the nobles exchanging worried glances. This was no longer a king's drunken whim. This was something none of them had anticipated. And in the healing chamber nearby, Anisia bound a kitchen boy's burned hand, unaware that her presence in the castle was becoming something far more significant than a royal jest. A fortnight after the unexpected royal wedding, the Great Council of Wallachia convened in the stone chamber beneath the eastern tower of Sigashora Castle. Sunlight filtered through narrow windows, illuminating the grave faces of the 12 men who advised the crown. Count Radu stood at the head of the massive oak table, his thin fingers splayed against the polished wood. At 53, he had served 3 kings and prided himself on his political acumen. This latest royal development troubled him deeply. "Your Majesty," he began carefully, "the nobility grows restless. Letters arrive daily from the great houses expressing their concern over the current situation." King Vladislav lounged in his chair, one leg thrown casually over the armrest. He looked decidedly sober today, which the council had hoped would make him more receptive to reason. "Their concern?" Vladislav repeated, his voice deceptively mild. "Do elaborate, Count." Radu glanced at his fellow councillors for support. "The matter of the queen, sire. Your hasty marriage to a common woman of no standing has created complications." "What complications?" The king's blue eyes narrowed dangerously. "Diplomatic ones, Your Majesty," Baron Dragos interjected. "The Byzantine envoy arrived yesterday. He carried marriage proposals from 3 noble families, each offering alliances that would strengthen our southern borders." "How unfortunate for them," Vladislav replied. "You informed the envoy that I am already wed, I presume?" "We did," Radu confirmed. His disappointment was considerable. The king shrugged. "Men often find disappointment in this life." "Sire," Dragos pressed on, "the situation can still be remedied. A royal annulment would be simple to arrange. The church would support it, especially given the unusual circumstances." Vladislav's casual demeanor vanished. He straightened in his chair, his expression hardening into the mask that had made warriors tremble on battlefields across the Carpathians. You suggest I break my word? That I cast aside my queen because a few Byzantine nobles are disappointed? His voice was quiet, but with an edge that cut through the chamber. Have you forgotten who sits before you? The councillors shifted uncomfortably. Their king's temper was legendary, his punishments creative and often brutal. Your Majesty, Radu attempted again. We speak only out of concern for the stability of your reign. The woman brings no dowry, no political advantages, no— Her name, Vladislav interrupted coldly, is Queen Anicia. You will address her as such, or not at all. An uncomfortable silence descended upon the chamber. Finally, Treasurer Bogdan, who rarely spoke at council meetings, cleared his throat. Perhaps, Your Majesty, there is a compromise to be found. The Queen could be set aside discreetly, given lands and titles sufficient to ensure her comfort, while I what? Vladislav stood abruptly, causing several councillors to flinch. Take a more suitable bride, one you and your noble friends find acceptable. He strode to the window, his broad shoulders tense beneath his crimson tunic. I find it curious that none of you questioned my judgment when I led our forces against the Ottoman raids last summer. None doubted my wisdom when I negotiated favorable trade terms with the Venetian merchants. He turned back to face them. Yet now, you presume to dictate whom I may call wife? Sire, Radu began. Vladislav cut him off with a raised hand. Here is what will happen. You will accept Queen Anicia as your sovereign. You will afford her every courtesy and respect due her station, and you will cease this tedious campaign for annulment. His lips curved into a sardonic smile. Or perhaps you would prefer new leadership on the council. I'm certain there are hungry young nobles who would eagerly fill your seats. The threat hung in the air, unmistakable. As you command, Your Majesty, Radu conceded, bowing his head. Vladislav surveyed the chamber, making eye contact with each councillor in turn. Good. Now shall we discuss matters of actual importance to the realm? Later that afternoon, Vladislav found himself unexpectedly drawn to the castle's south wing, where Anicia had established her healing chamber. He paused at the open doorway, observing unnoticed as his queen worked. The room was filled with dried herbs hanging from the rafters, their earthy scent permeating the air. Anicia stood at a wooden table, grinding something in a mortar, her movements rhythmic and practiced. Beside her, a young soldier sat with his arm extended, a deep cut visible from elbow to wrist. This will sting, she warned as she applied a greenish paste to the wound, but it will prevent the rot from setting in. The soldier hissed between his teeth but remained still. Thank you, Your Majesty, he said. The royal physician wanted to take the arm entirely. Physicians are too quick to cut what they cannot understand. Anicia replied, her hands gentle as she wrapped clean linen around the soldier's arm. Come back tomorrow, and we'll see how it heals. Vladislav stepped into the room, causing the soldier to scramble to his feet and bow awkwardly. Your Majesty, he exclaimed. Sit before you fall, man, the king commanded. I see my queen is tending to my warriors now. Anicia glanced up, her expression composed. This is Stefan. He was injured during training yesterday. And you believe you can save his arm when my royal physician could not? I believe in trying before surrendering, she replied simply, continuing her work. Vladislav watched her hands, strong, capable hands that moved with confidence and care. Her fingernails were clean but work-worn, her knuckles slightly reddened from frequent washing. When she finished bandaging the soldier, she dismissed him with instructions for care. Stefan bowed deeply to both monarchs before leaving, his gratitude evident in his eyes. You've gained a loyal subject there, Vladislav observed. He's loyal to you, not me, Anicia countered, wiping her hands on a cloth. I merely helped him keep the arm he uses to serve you. The king moved further into the room, examining the bundles of herbs with curious eyes. The council wants me to annul our marriage, he said abruptly. If Anicia was surprised by this revelation, she didn't show it. That seems sensible from their perspective. Does it seem sensible from yours? He asked, studying her face. She considered this, her brown eyes thoughtful. I have never expected this arrangement to last, Your Majesty. I am no fool. No, he agreed. You are many things, but never that. He picked up a sprig of dried rosemary, rolling it between his fingers. What if I told you I refused their counsel? Now surprise flickered across her features. Why would you do that? Perhaps I enjoy watching them squirm. He smiled wickedly. Perhaps I find their discomfort entertaining. So I remain queen to spite your counsel? There was no bitterness in her tone, merely curiosity. Vladislav stepped closer, close enough to notice the faint scent of lavender that clung to her hair. Tell me, Anicia, do you regret accepting my drunken proposal? She met his gaze steadily. Would my regret change anything? You answer questions with questions. And you avoid answering altogether, she countered, a hint of amusement in her eyes. Vladislav laughed, genuinely surprised by her boldness. Few in his kingdom dared speak to him with such frankness. I do not regret it, she said finally, her voice softening, though I cannot imagine what purpose it serves. The king reached out, an impulsive gesture that surprised them both, and touched her cheek lightly. Perhaps it serves no purpose beyond the moment. Not all things must have grand designs behind them. For an instant something shifted between them, a subtle change in the air, a new awareness. Then a servant appeared at the doorway, announcing that the Hungarian envoy had arrived for his scheduled audience. Vladislav withdrew his hand, his expression becoming once more the mask of kingship. Duty calls, he said, inclining his head slightly before turning to leave. It always does, Anísia replied softly to his retreating back. That evening, as twilight descended over Sigashora, rumors of King Vladislav's defense of his new queen spread throughout the castle. Servants whispered in corridors, soldiers murmured in barracks, and nobles exchanged worried glances at dinner. What had begun as a drunken jest was evolving into something none had anticipated. The king seemed genuinely intrigued by his unusual queen, and she, in turn, was gaining quiet respect among the common folk of the castle. In her chamber that night, Anísia sat by the window, watching stars appear above the Carpathian Mountains. A soft knock at her door revealed a page boy carrying a small wooden box. From His Majesty, the child announced, presenting it with a solemn bow. Inside, she found a silver brooch shaped like a sprig of lavender, finely crafted and set with tiny amethysts. A note accompanied it, written in the king's strong hand. Wear this tomorrow. Let them see their queen adorned as befits her station. Anísia ran her fingers over the delicate metalwork, her heart beating strangely fast. Beyond her window, a hunting horn sounded, signaling the king's departure. Vladislav rode out with a small party of trusted men, embarking on what the council had termed a minor border dispute, requiring royal attention. What none knew as they watched the royal party disappear into the gathering darkness was how this brief campaign would forever alter the fragile connection forming between the unlikely royal couple. The border village of Rushinari nestled in the shadow of the Carpathian Mountains, its thatched roofs and wooden cottages a stark contrast to the imposing stone watchtower that marked Walachia's territorial claim. For generations, the villagers had paid taxes to King Vladislav's treasury while living in relative peace. That peace had shattered 3 days ago when a band of rebels, led by a local boyar named Vasile Sherban, seized the watchtower and declared their allegiance to the neighboring principality. A minor rebellion, Captain Mihai reported as Vladislav's company crested the final hill overlooking the village. Sherban has perhaps 40 men, poorly armed but well positioned. They hold the high ground and control the village's water supply. Vladislav frowned, studying the terrain through narrowed eyes. The afternoon sun glinted off his polished breastplate as he shifted in his saddle. And the villagers? Caught between loyalties, Your Majesty. Some support Sherban, who promises lower taxes under new rule. Others remain loyal to your crown, but fear reprisal if they speak openly. The king nodded, his expression hardening. He had departed Sigashora in haste, eager for action after weeks of courtly politics and council meetings. The rebellion, insignificant as it seemed, offered a welcome distraction from thoughts that increasingly centered on his unusual queen. We'll make camp here, he decided, gesturing to a flat area sheltered by pine trees. "Send a messenger to Sherban. Tell him his king offers one chance to surrender before facing royal justice." As his men established camp, Vladislav retreated to his tent, where a page waited with wine. The king drank deeply, welcoming the familiar warmth that spread through his body. One cup became two, then three, the rich red liquid dulling the sharp edges of his thoughts. When Captain Mihai returned 2 hours later, Vladislav was well into his cups, his mood dangerously unpredictable. "The rebels' response, Your Majesty." Mihai's voice betrayed his unease as he delivered the message. Vladislav read the parchment, his face darkening with each line. Sherban not only refused to surrender but questioned the king's legitimacy, making crude references to his common bride, and suggesting that a monarch who would marry a fat herb gatherer had lost his judgment and the divine right to rule. "He dares?" Vladislav crushed the parchment in his fist, rage building like a summer storm. "He dares mock his king and queen. Sire, perhaps we should wait until morning to—" "We attack now," Vladislav interrupted, rising unsteadily to his feet. "I will have this traitor's head before midnight." Captain Mihai paled. "Your Majesty, night approaches. The terrain is treacherous in darkness, and they hold the defensive position. Are you questioning my command?" The king's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "No, sire," Mihai replied, recognizing the futility of further argument. "I will prepare the men." An hour later, as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Vladislav led his force of 60 royal guards toward the village. Torches illuminated their approach, a tactical error born of the king's inebriated bravado. He wanted Sherban to see him coming, wanted the rebel to know fear before he died. From the watchtower, a horn sounded the alarm. "Forward!" Vladislav shouted, drawing his sword and spurring his stallion ahead of his men. "For Wallachia!" The first arrows fell like deadly rain, whistling through the night air. 2 royal guards fell immediately, their armor insufficient against the precision of the tower archers. Still, Vladislav pressed forward, alcohol and rage making him reckless. Captain Mihai fought to keep pace with his king, shouting orders to the men behind them. "Shield formation! Protect His Majesty!" But Vladislav was beyond caution. He charged into the village square, sword raised, bellowing challenges to Sherban. Rebels emerged from between buildings, their ambush perfectly timed. The royal guards fought valiantly, but the chaotic night battle quickly fractured into small, desperate skirmishes. Surrounded by 3 attackers, Vladislav fought with the ferocity that had made him legendary on the battlefield. His sword claimed the first rebel with a powerful slash across the chest. The second fell to a thrust beneath the arm. But as he turned to face the third, something unexpected happened. From the shadows of a nearby cottage, a 4th rebel emerged, holding not a sword, but a spear. With perfect aim, he hurled it at the king's exposed back. Captain Mihai shouted a warning, but too late. The spear struck Vladislav between his shoulder blades, the force of the blow knocking him from his horse. Only his armor prevented immediate death, but blood quickly soaked through his tunic as he struggled to rise. "The king falls!" someone shouted, and the cry spread through the royal ranks like wildfire. Seeing their leader down, the royal guards rallied with renewed fury. Captain Mihai fought his way to Vladislav's side, standing over his fallen monarch as rebels closed in. "Hold them!" the captain roared, his sword a blur of deadly movement. "Shield the king!" Through a haze of pain and fading consciousness, Vladislav heard his men fighting to reach him. He tasted blood in his mouth and felt its warmth spreading across his back. His thoughts, suddenly clear of wine's influence, turned not to battle or kingdom, but strangely to Anisia's face, her calm eyes, her unexpected strength. "Retreat," Mihai ordered as more royal guards reached them. "Get His Majesty to safety." Strong hands lifted Vladislav onto a makeshift litter. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the night sky above, stars cold and distant as his life's blood seeped into Wallachian soil. Dawn broke over Sigashora Castle with a gentle gold that belied the grim news approaching its gates. Queen Anisia stood in the herb garden she had established near the kitchens, harvesting chamomile blossoms in the early morning light. The lavender brooch the king had given her gleamed at her throat, its amethysts catching the sun. A commotion at the main gate drew her attention. Servants and guards rushed toward the barbican, their voices rising in alarm. Setting aside her basket, Anesia followed, an unfamiliar dread settling in her stomach. The royal party returned not in triumph, but in tragedy. At the center of the somber procession, a wagon carried a still form covered with the king's crimson battle standard. Captain Mihai, his armor blood-spattered and his face grim with exhaustion, dismounted before the gathering crowd. "The king lives," he announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard, "but barely. The royal physician is needed immediately." Anesia pushed through the stunned onlookers. "Bring him to the royal chamber," she commanded, her voice steady despite the shock coursing through her, "and fetch hot water, clean linens, and my herbs." Count Radu stepped forward, his expression uncertain. "My lady, perhaps the royal physician will attend him," Anesia agreed, "but there is no time to waste on protocol. Move." Something in her tone, authority without arrogance, spurred the servants into action. As men carefully transferred Vladislav's unconscious form to his bedchamber, Anesia gathered her supplies, her mind racing through remedies for battlefield wounds. The royal physician, Master Theodore, arrived breathless and immediately assessed the king's condition. The spear had penetrated between the plates of Vladislav's armor, leaving a deep wound dangerously close to his spine. The journey home had worsened it, with blood loss and fever now threatening the king's life. "It is grave, your majesty," Master Theodore informed Anesia with formal deference. "The wound itself might heal with proper care, but fever has taken hold. Many strong men succumb to such infections." Anesia studied Vladislav's face, unnaturally pale against the pillows. "What do you propose?" "Bloodletting to balance the humors," the physician replied. "And prayer, your majesty, much prayer." "No bloodletting," Anesia countered firmly. "He has lost enough blood already." Master Theodore's eyebrows rose in surprise. "With respect, your majesty, I have studied medicine in Constantinople. The ancient texts clearly indicate. I've watched too many die after bloodletting, Master Theodore." Anesia interrupted. "The king needs his strength, not further weakening." She approached the bedside and gently lifted the dressing the physician had applied. The wound was angry and red, heat radiating from the inflamed skin surrounding it. "I need yarrow for the bleeding, goldenrod for infection, and willow bark for the fever," she said decisively. "And someone must stay with him constantly to change the dressings and administer teas." "Your Majesty," Master Theodore protested, "these folk remedies have saved many in my village." Anesia finished for him. "We will try both our methods, Master Theodore. The king deserves every chance." A tense silence filled the chamber as physician and queen regarded each other across the king's unconscious form. Finally, Master Theodore bowed stiffly. "As you wish, your majesty. I will return this evening to reassess his condition." When the physician departed, Count Radu stepped forward from where he had been observing silently by the door. "The council must be informed of his majesty's condition," he said, "and preparations must be made for all eventualities." Anesia understood his meaning all too clearly. If Vladislav died, her brief reign as queen would end immediately. She would be cast out, return to her former life, if she was fortunate enough to escape blame for the king's death. "Inform them," she agreed, turning back to her husband. "But also tell them this. Their king will not die today, not while I draw breath to prevent it." After Radu left, Anesia set to work. She cleansed the wound with a strong herbal infusion, applied a poultice of crushed yarrow and goldenrod, and wrapped clean bandages around Vladislav's torso. When he moaned in pain, she spoke softly, her hand steady on his brow. "Fight, my king," she whispered. "Your kingdom needs you." Day faded into night, and still Anesia remained at Vladislav's bedside. Servants brought her food she barely touched. The fever worsened, causing the king to thrash and mumble incoherently. She wiped his brow with cool cloths and coaxed sips of willow bark tea between his cracked lips. In his delirium, Vladislav spoke of battles long past, of his father's disappointment, of the cold loneliness of the crown. And sometimes, in quieter moments, he called for Anicia, though whether he knew she sat beside him remained unclear. During one such moment, as midnight approached, and the castle settled into uneasy slumber, Vladislav's eyes opened briefly. They were glazed with fever, but found her face in the candlelight. "You," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "Rest, your majesty," Anicia urged, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. His hand moved weakly, fumbling until it found hers. "Stay," he whispered. "I am here," she promised, curling her fingers around his. "I remain at your side." A ghost of a smile touched his lips before unconsciousness reclaimed him. Anicia continued her vigil, her hand still clasping his, as if that tenuous connection might anchor him to the living world. Outside the royal chamber, the castle held its collective breath. In the great hall, nobles whispered of succession and power. In the servants' quarters, loyal retainers prayed for their king's recovery. And in the council chamber, men who had scorned their queen now watched the door to the royal apartments, waiting for news that would shape the kingdom's future. Dawn approached, and Anicia's eyes grew heavy with exhaustion. Still, she fought sleep, focused entirely on each labored breath Vladislav took. When his breathing suddenly changed, becoming more ragged, then eerily quiet, fear seized her heart. "No," she whispered fiercely, gripping his hand tighter. "You will not leave. Not now." As if in answer, Vladislav's chest rose with a deep, shuddering breath. The fever that had burned so hot throughout the night began, gradually but perceptibly, to break. By the time golden morning light filtered through the chamber windows, a light sheen of cooling sweat covered his brow. And when his eyes finally opened, clear for the first time since his return, they found Anicia slumped in sleep beside him, her hand still clasped firmly in his own. For 3 days, Vladislav drifted between consciousness and fevered dreams. Each time he opened his eyes, he found Anicia nearby, sometimes preparing herbal infusions, sometimes changing his bandages, but always present. She moved with quiet efficiency, her strong hands gentle yet certain in their work. On the 4th morning, the king woke with his mind finally clear. Sunlight streamed through the partially opened window, bringing with it the scent of pine and distant wood smoke. Anicia sat in a chair beside the bed, her head nodding forward in exhaustion, her breathing deep and even in sleep. Vladislav studied her face, noting the dark circles beneath her eyes and the new lines of fatigue etched around her mouth. Her hair, usually neatly braided, hung loose around her shoulders. The lavender brooch he had given her remained pinned to her simple dress, now wrinkled from days of continuous wear. Something unfamiliar stirred in his chest as he watched her. Not desire, not gratitude, but something deeper that he could not name. He tried to shift position and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through his back. His involuntary gasp woke Anicia instantly. Her eyes flew open, immediately alert despite her exhaustion. "You're awake," she said, leaning forward to place a cool hand on his forehead. "The fever has broken properly at last." "How long?" Vladislav's voice was a dry rasp, barely recognizable even to himself. 4 days since they brought you home," she replied, reaching for a cup of water. She helped him drink, supporting his head with a gentle but firm hand. "Captain Mihai feared you wouldn't survive the journey." The king swallowed painfully, memories of the disastrous battle flooding back. "Sherban?" "Escaped into the mountains, according to the reports. The rebellion was quelled after your injury. Your men fought with extraordinary courage to avenge their fallen king." "Not fallen yet," Vladislav murmured, his lips curving into a faint smile. "No," Anicia agreed, her expression softening. "Not fallen, though it was a close thing." A silence settled between them, comfortable yet weighted with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Vladislav spoke again, his voice stronger. "You saved me." She shook her head. "I merely tended your wounds. The strength to survive came from within you. The physicians said I would die. I heard them speaking when they thought me unconscious." His blue eyes, still bright with the remnants of fever, held hers steadily. They said only a miracle would save me. You were that miracle. Color rose in Anisia's cheeks. I used herbs and poultices, techniques any village healer knows. There was no miracle in that. You refused to let me die, Vladislav insisted. I heard your voice in the darkness calling me back. She looked away, suddenly unable to meet his gaze. I did what any loyal subject would do for their king. Is that all I am to you? Your king? The question hung between them, surprising them both with its implication. Before Anisia could respond, the chamber door opened to admit Count Radu and Master Theodore. Their expressions registered shock at finding the king conscious and coherent. Your Majesty! Master Theodore hurried to the bedside, pushing past Anisia to examine his royal patient. This is most unexpected, though most welcome, of course. Indeed, Count Radu added, his calculating eyes moving between the king and queen. The council will be overjoyed to hear of your recovery, sire. Vladislav noted how Radu deliberately avoided addressing or even looking at Anisia. The slight kindled a spark of anger in him, one that would have erupted into rage before his injury. Now, weakened by his wound, he found himself observing the count's behavior with a new clarity. You may inform the council, Vladislav said, his voice cool despite its weakness, that their king lives thanks to the diligent care of their queen. Radu's lips tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, Your Majesty. Her diligence has been remarkable. Leave us, Vladislav commanded suddenly. All of you. I wish to rest. When Master Theodore began to protest, the king silenced him with a look that reminded everyone present that despite his weakened state, he remained the feared ruler of Wallachia. The physician and count withdrew with reluctant bows. Anisia rose to follow them, but Vladislav's hand caught her wrist with surprising strength. Not you, he said quietly. Stay. She hesitated, then resumed her seat beside him. You should rest, Your Majesty. I've been unconscious for 4 days. I've rested enough. His hand remained around her wrist, his thumb absently tracing the pulse point beneath her skin. Tell me what happened while I lay here. Truth, not courtly platitudes. Anisia regarded him thoughtfully, then nodded. The council has been meeting daily, sometimes twice daily. They fear your death would create instability, particularly with the rebellion so recently suppressed. And what of you? What did they say of my queen? A shadow crossed her face. What you would expect. Some suggested I was to blame for your condition, that I had somehow influenced you to undertake the campaign recklessly. Vladislav's expression darkened. That's absurd. My recklessness needs no outside influence. Others argued about what would happen to me should you... She paused. Should the worst occur? And what did you do while they plotted and whispered? I stayed here, she replied simply. I tended your wound, prepared medicines, watched for signs of improvement or decline. The political maneuvering seemed remote compared to the immediate task of keeping you breathing. The king studied her face, struck anew by her composure, her complete lack of artifice. You never left my side, only briefly, to gather fresh herbs or prepare new infusions. Even when they said I would not survive, especially then. Her eyes met his, unwavering. I've seen men far worse injured recover when everyone had given up hope. I was not prepared to surrender you to death so easily. Vladislav's grip on her wrist tightened slightly. Why, Anisia? Why fight so hard for a king who married you on a drunken whim? Who has given you nothing but the mockery of the court? The question seemed to catch her off guard. She looked down at his hand encircling her wrist, then back to his face. Because every life has value, she said finally. Because I took vows before God to stand beside you. Because... She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Because I've seen glimpses of a man beneath the crown who deserves the chance to live, to become more than his worst impulses. Her honesty struck him like a physical blow. In his entire life, surrounded by courtiers and sycophants, no one had ever spoken to him with such simple truth. No one had seen beyond his title, his power, his temper, to the possibility of something more. Shame washed over him. Shame for his arrogance, his recklessness, his casual cruelty. The emotion was so unfamiliar that for a moment he could not name it. His grip on her wrist loosened, his hand falling away. "You should rest now, truly," Anisha said gently, rising from her chair. "I'll return later with food and fresh medicine." Vladislav watched her move toward the door, suddenly reluctant to see her go. "Anisha." She turned back, a question in her eyes. "Thank you," he said, the words awkward on his tongue. When had he last expressed genuine gratitude to anyone? She inclined her head in acknowledgement, a small smile touching her lips. "Rest well, Your Majesty." After she departed, Vladislav lay in the quiet chamber, his thoughts more turbulent than his weakened body could express. Something fundamental had shifted within him during these days between life and death. Something he could not yet fully comprehend, but which left him feeling as though he was seeing the world, and himself, through new eyes. In the days that followed, his physical recovery progressed slowly. The wound in his back began to heal cleanly, though the pain remained significant enough to keep him confined to his chambers. Anisha continued to tend him, but now with the assistance of servants and under the watchful eye of Master Theodore, who reluctantly acknowledged the efficacy of her herbal treatments. Though Anisha no longer spent every moment at his bedside, Vladislav found himself watching for her visits, noting how the chamber seemed to brighten with her presence. Their conversations, once awkward and formal, developed an easy rhythm. She spoke to him not as a subject to a king, but as one person to another, a novelty that both disconcerted and refreshed him. One evening, as autumn winds rattled the castle windows, Vladislav sat propped up with pillows while Anisha changed his bandages. He had regained some strength, enough to feed himself and sit upright for short periods, but remained frustratingly dependent on others for many basic needs. "The wound heals well," Anisha observed, applying a fresh poultice of comfrey and honey. "Another week and you should be able to walk short distances." "A week?" Vladislav scowled. "Too long. The council grows too comfortable making decisions in my absence." "Better decisions made in your absence than no king to make them at all," she countered, binding the fresh dressing in place with practiced hands. "Your impatience nearly cost you your life once already." He opened his mouth to deliver a sharp retort, then closed it again, struck by the truth in her words. After a moment he sighed. "You speak to me as no one else dares." "Would you prefer flattery and fear?" she asked, meeting his gaze directly. "I've had a lifetime of both. They grow tedious." A reluctant smile tugged at his lips. "Though your bluntness occasionally stings." "Truth often does," Anisha replied, but her eyes held a warmth that softened her words. Yet wounds heal stronger for proper cleaning, however much it may hurt in the moment. The wisdom in her simple statement resonated deeply within him. As he watched her gather her herbs and medicines, Vladislav realized with sudden clarity what had changed during his brush with death. For the first time in his life, he felt ashamed of the man he had been and curious about the man he might become. Autumn painted the Carpathian forests in fiery hues of red and gold as King Vladislav slowly regained his strength. 2 weeks after regaining consciousness, he made his first tentative journey from his bedchamber to the small private courtyard outside his apartments. Though the distance was short, the effort left him winded and frustrated by his body's betrayal. Anisha walked beside him, close enough to offer support if needed, but careful not to hover. She had learned that his pride was as much a part of him as his flesh and blood. "This weakness is intolerable," Vladislav muttered, lowering himself carefully onto a stone bench. The autumn sun warmed his face, a welcome change from the confines of his chambers. How can a king rule when he can barely walk? "Kings have ruled from sickbeds before," Anisha observed, settling beside him. "Your mind remains sharp, and your voice carries authority even from a reclining position." Vladislav snorted, but there was amusement in his eyes. "You have a gift for practical consolation." "Would you prefer empty flattery?" she asked, a hint of teasing in her tone. "God, no." He stretched carefully, testing the limits of his healing wound. "I've had enough of that to last several lifetimes." They sat in companionable silence, watching golden leaves drift down from a nearby linden tree. In the weeks of his recovery, a new ease had developed between them, a comfort that neither had anticipated, but both had come to value. "Tell me of your childhood," Vladislav said suddenly. "I know nothing of your life before you appeared in my hall with your basket of herbs." Anicia looked surprised by his interest. "There is little to tell. I was born in a small village near Brasov. My father was a carpenter, my mother a midwife who knew the healing properties of plants." "And that is how you learned your skills? From your mother?" She nodded. "From my earliest memories, I followed her through forests and meadows, learning which plants healed and which harmed. When fever took her and my father in the same winter, I continued her work." "How old were you?" 18. Her eyes grew distant with memory. "Old enough to survive alone, young enough to feel the loss deeply." Vladislav studied her profile, struck by the quiet strength in her expression. "You never married?" "Before." He gestured vaguely between them, suddenly awkward. A small smile curved her lips. "No. There were offers, but none that tempted me enough to give up my independence." "Yet you accepted my drunken proposal without hesitation," he observed. "That was hardly a proposal, Your Majesty," she countered with surprising frankness. "That was a royal command, delivered in circumstances that allowed for no refusal." Vladislav had the grace to look abashed. "True enough." He paused, then asked the question that had lingered in his mind. "Do you regret it now?" Anicia turned to meet his gaze directly. "Do you?" The king considered carefully before answering. In the past, he would have dismissed such a question with a cutting remark or convenient lie. Now, something in him demanded honesty. "No," he said finally, "though I cannot explain why. By all logic, our match is absurd. I was arrogant and drunk. You were in the wrong place at the wrong moment. Yet here we sit, and I find myself glad of your company." Color rose in Anisia's cheeks, but her eyes remained steady on his. "Then we are alike in that, at least." Something shifted between them in that moment, a subtle change in the air, a new awareness that neither quite knew how to navigate. Vladislav found himself reaching for her hand, his fingers closing around hers with gentle pressure. "We've created quite the scandal, you and I," he said, his voice lighter than he felt. "The court still hopes you'll set me aside once you're fully recovered." Anicia replied, though she made no move to withdraw her hand. "They'll be disappointed," Vladislav said firmly. Then, with a wry smile, he added, "Though I confess my reasons have changed." "Oh? And what were they before?" "Stubbornness, pride, a desire to vex those who thought they could dictate to their king." His thumb traced idle patterns across her knuckles. "And now?" "Now," he said slowly, the truth revealing itself even as he spoke, "I find myself valuing a voice that speaks honestly, a presence that soothes rather than agitates, a perspective that sees beyond crown and title to the man beneath." The honesty of his words surprised them both. Anisia's eyes widened slightly, and for once she seemed at a loss for words. The moment was interrupted by approaching footsteps. They separated instinctively as Captain Mihai appeared at the courtyard entrance, his expression apologetic but urgent. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Majesties," he said with a respectful bow. "The Hungarian ambassador has arrived and insists on an audience." Vladislav sighed, the weight of kingship settling once more on his shoulders. "Inform him that I will receive him tomorrow. Today I am still recovering from my wounds." "Of course, sire." Mihai hesitated. "There is one other matter. The rebel leader, Sherban, has been captured in the mountains. He is being brought to Sigashora as we speak." The king's expression hardened. "Have him placed in the North Tower when he arrives. I will deal with him personally once my strength permits." After Mihai departed, Vladislav turned back to Anicia, the easy intimacy of the previous moment shattered by the intrusion of royal duties. "You should return to your chambers and rest," she suggested, rising from the bench. "You've been outside longer than Master Theodore recommended." Vladislav nodded, allowing her to help him to his feet. As they walked slowly back toward his apartments, He found himself reluctant to let the moment end. "Will you dine with me this evening?" he asked as they reached his door. "The walls of my chamber close in after so many days of confinement." Anesia smiled. "Of course, Your Majesty." "Vladislav," he corrected impulsively. "When we are alone, at least, I would hear my name from your lips, not my title." Surprise flickered across her face, followed by a gentle warmth. "If that is your wish." "Vladislav." His name and her voice sent an unexpected shiver through him. "It is," he confirmed, finding himself momentarily lost in her steady gaze. That evening, they dined by the fireplace in his private chamber, servants dismissed after delivering the meal. The autumn night had turned cold, rain pattering against the leaded windows. Inside, the fire cast dancing shadows across the stone walls as they shared a simple meal of roasted venison, autumn vegetables, and freshly baked bread. Vladislav observed with amusement how Anesia used her knife with precision, cutting her food into small, neat pieces. "You eat like a noblewoman trained from birth," he remarked. She laughed softly. "Is there a particular way a queen should cut her meat?" "According to the court etiquette masters, yes. There are rules for everything: how to hold a cup, which finger to extend, how deeply to bow depending on rank." He rolled his eyes. "Tedious nonsense that occupies minds too small for meaningful thoughts. Yet necessary, perhaps, in maintaining the structures that keep a kingdom functioning," Anesia suggested. Vladislav considered this, surprised by her insight. "Perhaps, though I've never had the patience for such minutiae." "That much is evident," she teased gently. He laughed, the sound startling them both with its genuine warmth. "You mock your king?" "I observe my husband," she corrected, then looked suddenly uncertain as if she'd overstepped. "Husband," Vladislav repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, I suppose I am that, though we've hardly lived as such." A comfortable silence fell between them as they continued their meal. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the castle walls. "We'll have an early winter this year," Anesia observed. "The signs have been present since late summer: the thickness of animal fur, the early migration of birds, the abundance of nuts and berries." Vladislav regarded her with curiosity. "You read such signs as clearly as my advisors read political treatises." "Nature speaks clearly to those who listen," she replied simply. "My mother taught me to observe the world around me, to notice patterns and changes." "What else did she teach you?" he asked, genuinely interested. As the fire burned low and the rain continued its steady rhythm, Anesia shared stories of her childhood, gathering herbs in moonlight, learning to set broken bones, helping deliver babies in tiny village huts. Vladislav listened, asking questions and sharing occasional memories of his own much different upbringing. The rigid training in weaponry, the cold lessons in statecraft, the constant pressure to embody strength and authority. "We come from different worlds," he observed as the evening grew late. "And yet here we sit at the same table," Anesia replied, her eyes reflecting the firelight. Vladislav reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Here we sit," he agreed softly. The simple touch, the gentle pressure of his fingers against hers, carried a significance that neither could articulate but both could feel. Something new was growing between them, something neither had anticipated when fate and a drunken wager had thrown them together. As thunder rumbled distantly over the Carpathians, they remained by the dying fire, hands joined, words giving way to comfortable silence. In that moment, Vladislav realized with sudden clarity that for the first time in his life, he felt not the isolation of power but the warmth of genuine connection. The first snow of winter dusted Sigashora Castle's towers as King Vladislav entered the great hall for the first time since his injury. 6 weeks of recovery had restored much of his strength, though a persistent stiffness in his back remained, a permanent reminder of his near-fatal encounter with Shurban's spear. The assembled courtiers and council members rose as one when the king appeared. Their faces registered poorly concealed shock at the changes in their monarch. Vladislav had lost weight during his convalescence, his once imposing frame now leaner, almost ascetic. His dark hair, longer than before, was streaked with new threads of silver at the temples, but most striking was his expression. The habitual arrogance had given way to something more measured, more watchful. Queen Anisha walked beside him, neither supporting him nor trailing behind, but matching his deliberately measured pace. She wore a simple gown of deep blue velvet, a concession to her royal status, but had refused the elaborate headdresses favored by noble ladies. Her chestnut hair remained in its practical braid, adorned only by a silver circlet. Vladislav raised a hand, silencing the murmured greetings and formal welcomes. "I have summoned you today," he began, his voice strong despite his altered appearance, "to announce changes to the governance of Wallachia." Count Radu stepped forward, his smile tight with barely concealed anxiety. "Your Majesty, the Council has prepared several matters requiring your attention, but perhaps after you have fully regained your strength." "My strength is sufficient for what must be done," Vladislav interrupted, ascending the dais where his throne awaited. He remained standing, surveying the assemblage with clear eyes. "My battle with death has granted me perspective." An uneasy silence fell across the hall. The nobles exchanged worried glances. This was not the impulsive, wine-loving king they knew how to navigate. "First," Vladislav continued, "the council will be reformed. For too long, leadership has rested with those whose primary qualification is noble birth rather than wisdom or merit." Shock rippled through the assembly. Count Radu's face drained of color. "Sire," he protested, "the great council has served Wallachia for generations. Your own father—" "My father is dead," Vladislav cut in sharply. "As I nearly was. The time for clinging to traditions that no longer serve the kingdom has passed." He gestured to Captain Mihai, who stepped forward from his position near the wall. "Captain Mihai will join the council, bringing the perspective of our military forces." Next, he nodded toward a gray-haired man in simple but fine clothing who stood near the back of the hall. "Master Ionescu, who represents the Guild of Merchants, will advise on matters of trade and commerce." Murmurs of disbelief grew louder. Vladislav raised his voice to be heard over them. "Additional members will be named in the coming days. Some will come from noble houses, others from the ranks of scholars, craftsmen, and village elders." Baron Dragos, his face mottled with anger, stepped forward. "This is unprecedented, Your Majesty. To elevate commoners to such positions is precisely what our kingdom needs," Vladislav finished for him. His tone was calm but carried an unmistakable authority. "I have spent my life surrounded by noble voices saying the same things, repeating the same mistakes. It is time for new voices." His eyes found Anicia, who stood quietly at the side of the dais. "Time for wisdom that comes not from ancient scrolls, but from life lived close to the earth and its people." Something in his gaze, in the softened lines around his eyes when he looked at his queen, did not go unnoticed by the observant courtiers. Whispers began anew, taking on a different tenor. "Secondly," Vladislav continued, returning his attention to the assembly, "I decree that Queen Anicia will be accorded every respect and courtesy due her station. Any word or action that dishonors her will be considered a direct insult to your king." He paused, his gaze sweeping the hall with the predatory focus that had once made him feared on the battlefield. "And I trust I need not elaborate on how I respond to insults." No one spoke. Even the most disgruntled nobles recognized the dangerous edge beneath the king's controlled exterior. "Lastly," Vladislav said, his voice softening slightly, "the Queen has requested permission to establish a school of healing arts for the women of Sigashora and surrounding villages. I have granted this request. The east wing of the castle will be allocated for this purpose." This announcement triggered a fresh wave of muttering. The idea of common women entering the castle for instruction, particularly instruction from the Queen they had mocked, seemed to disturb the nobility even more than the council reforms. Anicia stepped forward then, speaking publicly for the first time since becoming queen. Her voice was clear and steady, carrying easily across the hushed hall. "Many lives are lost needlessly to illness and injury," she said simply. "Knowledge of healing herbs and proper care can save those lives. This knowledge should not be hoarded but shared widely." Several noblewomen in the assembly exchanged glances of surprise. Some nodded thoughtfully, others scowled. Lady Elena, one of the most vocal critics of the Queen, spoke up with barely disguised disdain. "Will your Majesty be conducting these Lessons personally? Surely such common work is beneath the dignity of a queen. Anicia met the woman's gaze steadily. There is no work more dignified than that which preserves life, my lady, whether performed by queen or peasant. Vladislav smiled, a brief but genuine expression that transformed his austere features. My queen speaks wisdom, Lady Elena. Perhaps you might benefit from attending her lessons yourself. Scattered laughter broke the tension, though Lady Elena's face flushed crimson with humiliation. These changes take effect immediately, Vladislav concluded. Those named to the new council will remain. The rest of you are dismissed. As the nobility filed out, their expressions ranging from thoughtful to outraged, Vladislav finally seated himself on the throne. Anicia approached, concern evident in her eyes. You look weary, she observed quietly. This has taxed your strength. Worth the cost, he replied, reaching for her hand. The gesture, performed openly before the remaining council members, made a statement more powerful than any decree. You disapprove of my methods? Not disapproval, she clarified. Concern. Change this rapid breeds resistance. Some will not surrender power willingly. Vladislav's lips curved in a wolfish smile. Let them resist. I have faced deadlier opponents than disgruntled nobles. The new councillors approached cautiously, their expressions betraying their uncertainty in this unfamiliar role. Captain Mihai and Master Ionescu bowed respectfully to both king and queen. Your Majesty, Mihai began, there are pressing matters requiring immediate attention. The prisoner Sherban. Tomorrow, Vladislav interrupted, rising carefully from the throne. Today I have done enough. Tomorrow we will address Sherban and the other issues facing our kingdom. After the hall had emptied, Vladislav and Anicia walked slowly through the castle corridors toward the royal apartments. Snow fell more heavily beyond the windows, transforming the castle grounds into a landscape of pristine white. You surprised them today, Anicia observed. They did not expect such sweeping changes. I surprised myself, Vladislav admitted. Even a week ago I might have lacked the resolve to challenge traditions so deeply entrenched. They paused at a window overlooking the courtyard where servants hurried about their duties, heads bent against the swirling snow. What changed? Anicia asked, though something in her eyes suggested she already knew the answer. Vladislav turned to face her fully, his expression unusually vulnerable. Nearly dying has a way of clarifying one's thoughts, as does having someone care for you not out of duty or fear, but out of... He hesitated, searching for the right word. Compassion, she suggested. Perhaps more than that, he said softly. His hand rose to touch her cheek, a gesture of tentative tenderness. I have ruled by fear and force my entire life, believing power was all that mattered. You've shown me another way, the strength in gentleness, the power in quiet wisdom. Anicia placed her hand over his where it rested against her face. You give me too much credit. The capacity for change was always within you. Perhaps, he conceded, but it took you to awaken it. Their eyes held in a moment of perfect understanding. Then, with a gentleness that would have astonished those who knew him only as a warrior king, Vladislav lowered his lips to hers in a kiss that spoke of gratitude, respect, and something deeper neither had dared name. When they parted, Anicia's eyes reflected surprise and a quiet joy. That was unexpected. Regrets? He asked, suddenly uncertain. None, she replied softly, though I wonder what your court would say if they saw their fearsome king now. Vladislav laughed, the sound echoing through the stone corridor. Let them talk. I find I care less each day for their opinions. Snow continued to fall beyond the castle walls as king and queen walked hand in hand through corridors once filled only with politics and power. Change had come to Wallachia, not through battle or decree alone, but through the unexpected connection between two souls who had found in each other something neither had known they sought. The royal chambers were quiet, save for the crackling of the hearth fire and the occasional rustle of parchment. King Vladislav sat at his writing desk, reading through reports from across his realm with a focus that would have astonished his former self. A goblet of watered wine, his third concession to his new moderation, sat untouched at his elbow. A soft knock interrupted his concentration. "Enter," he called, expecting a messenger or servant. Instead, Captain Mihai appeared, his expression grave. "Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion at this late hour." Vladislav set aside the reports, immediately alert to the tension in his captain's bearing. "What troubles you, Mihai?" These arrived by separate messengers within the hour. Mihai placed 2 sealed letters on the desk. One from Baron Neagu at the western border, another from your cousin, Lord Stefan, in Brasov. The king broke the first seal, his eyes scanning the hurried script. His expression darkened as he read. Without comment, he opened the second letter, which appeared to confirm the contents of the first. "So," he said finally, his voice deceptively calm, "Baron Dragos and Count Radu have not accepted their dismissal from the council with good grace." Mihai nodded grimly. "According to these reports, they've gathered support among several noble houses and are suggesting that your injury has affected your judgment. A convenient explanation for decisions they dislike," Vladislav observed, rising from his chair to stand before the fire. The flames cast his face in sharp relief, highlighting the new lines of experience etched around his eyes. "And my marriage to Anicia? They claim she has bewitched you, sire, that her common herbs and potions have addled your mind, making you pliant to her influence." A bitter laugh escaped the king's lips. "Once, such an accusation would have driven me to immediate, bloody retribution." "And now?" Mihai asked carefully. Vladislav turned, studying his loyal captain thoughtfully. "Now I find myself considering the wiser course. Tell me, Mihai, do you believe my judgment compromised?" The captain straightened, meeting his king's gaze directly. "I believe your injury and recovery have changed you, your Majesty, but not weakened you. If anything, I see greater strength in your measured responses than in your former impulses." "And the Queen? Do you share the noble's suspicions of her influence?" "I owe her my allegiance as I do you," Mihai replied diplomatically. "That wasn't my question." The captain hesitated, then spoke with careful honesty. "I've watched her care for wounded soldiers with the same devotion she showed you. I've seen her speak fairly to high-born and low. If she has influenced you, sire, I believe it has been toward becoming the king Wallachia truly needs." Vladislav nodded slowly, a hint of surprise in his expression. "Well said, Mihai. It seems I've underestimated you as well. What will you do about Dragos and Radu, your Majesty?" The king returned to his desk, examining the letters again. "How many men have they gathered?" "Perhaps 200, according to Lord Stefan's estimate. Mostly household guards and retainers, though they seek to recruit more." "Not enough for open rebellion, then, at least not yet." Vladislav's finger traced the map of Wallachia spread across his desk. "They will try to gather more support before making any overt move against the crown. Shall I muster the royal guard? We could ride out and arrest them before their numbers grow." Vladislav considered this, then shook his head. "No. That would only confirm their narrative that I've become a tyrant under my queen's influence. We need a more nuanced approach." A soft sound at the doorway drew both men's attention. Queen Anicia stood there, a woolen shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the winter chill. "Forgive me," she said, noting their serious expressions. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "You aren't interrupting," Vladislav replied, extending a hand to invite her in. "In fact, your counsel would be welcome." Mihai bowed respectfully to the queen, his earlier words to Vladislav seemingly confirmed by this natural deference to her presence. Anicia approached the desk, her eyes quickly taking in the scattered reports and opened letters. "Trouble from the nobility? Baron Dragos and Count Radu are attempting to organize resistance to our recent changes," Vladislav explained. "They claim you've bewitched me with herbs and feminine wiles." A small smile touched her lips. "If only my herbs were so powerful, I might have cured winter coughs and summer fevers across the kingdom by now." Her gentle humor eased some of the tension in the room. Even Mihai's stern expression softened slightly. "What do you advise, my queen?" Vladislav asked, his tone making it clear the question was genuine, not mere courtesy. Anicia considered for a moment, her eyes thoughtful, Force would only strengthen their position, giving them a rallying cry against you. But inaction invites greater boldness. My thoughts exactly, Vladislav agreed. Then perhaps the answer lies in neither attacking nor ignoring them, but in undermining their support. She moved to the map, her finger resting on the regions controlled by the dissenting nobles. These lands have villages and towns whose people might speak for or against their lords, depending on how they've been treated. Mihai looked confused. You suggest we ask peasants about their nobles' fitness to advise the crown? Not directly, Anisha clarified. But what if royal representatives traveled to these regions, officially to explain the new healing school and invite village women to attend? While there, they could assess the mood of the common folk and perhaps share stories of their king's recovery and renewed vision for Wallachia. Vladislav studied her with undisguised admiration. A gentle approach that achieves multiple goals at once. No show of military force, yet we gather intelligence and potentially sway public opinion away from their lords. And if these nobles truly rule justly, their people will say so, and perhaps that information would be valuable as well, she added. Not all resistance comes from malice. Some may arise from genuine concern or misunderstanding. The king nodded slowly. Wisdom indeed. He turned to Captain Mihai. Select trustworthy men and women for this mission. People who can listen well and report accurately. They should depart within 2 days. Yes, Your Majesty. Mihai bowed to them both before departing, leaving the royal couple alone with the crackling fire and the weight of the brewing conflict. Vladislav moved to stand beside Anicia at the window, where snow continued to fall in the darkness beyond. You never cease to surprise me, he said quietly. Most would counsel immediate retribution. As you once would have done yourself, she observed. True enough. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining with casual intimacy. I find myself wondering who I might have become had you entered my hall years earlier. We cannot know such things, Anicia replied softly. We have only the present moment and the choices before us now. They stood in comfortable silence for a time, watching the snowfall transform the world outside into something pure and new. Finally, Vladislav spoke again, his voice carrying a note of concern he would have hidden from anyone else. If these nobles gain enough support, they may pose a real threat. Not just to my reforms, but to you. Anicia turned to face him, her expression calm but resolute. I understood the risks of becoming your queen from the moment I accepted. I do not fear them. Perhaps you should, he countered gently. Men like Dragos and Radu view you as the source of their lost influence. They would not hesitate to harm you if given the chance. Then we must ensure they aren't given such a chance, she replied simply. But I won't hide away in fear, Vladislav. The healing school must continue. The reforms must move forward. To retreat now would only prove them right about your weakened resolve. He studied her face in the firelight, marveling at the quiet courage that had become as familiar to him as her gentle hands and thoughtful eyes. When did you become so fierce, my quiet herb woman? He asked, a note of wonder in his voice. A smile touched her lips. Perhaps I always was, but had no kingdom to defend until now. Vladislav's hand rose to cup her cheek. Not just the kingdom, he said softly. I find myself thinking less of Wallachia's future and more of ours. The simple declaration hung between them, more significant than any formal vow they had exchanged in their hasty wedding. Anisia's eyes widened slightly, then softened with an emotion that made the king's heart beat faster. I never imagined having a future with a king, she admitted. Or any man, after so many years alone. Regrets? He asked, echoing their exchange from days earlier. None, she answered, rising on tiptoes to press her lips gently to his. The kiss deepened as Vladislav pulled her closer, one hand tangling in her hair as the other circled her waist. When they finally parted, both somewhat breathless, a new understanding passed between them. What had begun as a drunken wager, continued as grudging respect, and blossomed into mutual admiration, had finally transformed into something neither had expected. Love, with all its vulnerability and strength. Outside, snow continued to fall, and somewhere in the kingdom, discontented nobles plotted against their changed king. But within the royal chambers, Vladislav and Anicia found a moment of peace in each other's arms, their unlikely union now the center around which both their worlds turned. Dawn broke cold and clear over Sigashora, the rising sun casting long shadows across the snow-covered castle grounds. In the great hall, King Vladislav stood surrounded by his newly formed council, their breath visible in the chilly air despite the roaring fires at either end of the massive room. "The reports are confirmed," Captain Mihai announced, placing a sealed message on the oak table. "Baron Dragos and Count Radu have gathered nearly 500 men at Dragos's fortress. They've sent messengers to neighboring provinces seeking additional support." Vladislav studied the map spread before them, small wooden markers indicating the positions of loyal and rebellious forces throughout the kingdom. "And our emissaries to the villages?" Master Ionescu, the merchant counselor, stepped forward. "They report mixed sentiments, Your Majesty. The common folk in Radu's lands suffer under heavy taxation and speak bitterly of his justice. Those under Dragos fare somewhat better, but fear his temper and the brutality of his soldiers. In neither region do the people show particular enthusiasm for rising against the crown," added Elena Dalka, a village elder newly appointed to the council. Her weathered face bore the lines of a life lived outdoors, but her shrewd eyes missed nothing. "However, they fear defying their lords more than they love their distant king, begging Your Majesty's pardon for the plain speaking." Vladislav nodded, appreciating her honesty. "Plain speaking is precisely what this council was formed to provide, Elder Dalka." The king circled the table slowly, his movements deliberate, a legacy of his still healing wound. "What of Sherban? Has our captured rebel provided any useful information?" "He confirms what we suspected," Mihai replied. "The border rebellion was encouraged and partially funded by Dragos, who sought to weaken your position and test your response. Sherban claims he was promised a noble title should the rebellion succeed in breaking that region away from Wallachia." Anger flashed briefly in Vladislav's eyes, a glimpse of his former self. "So my near death was part of their plan." "Not explicitly, according to Sherban," Mihai clarified. "Your decision to lead the response personally was unexpected. They had hoped merely to create a distraction while they consolidated support among the nobility." The doors to the great hall opened, admitting Queen Anicia, accompanied by two women dressed in the simple garb of villagers. The council members bowed respectfully as she approached the table. "Forgive my tardiness," Anicia said, nodding to the assembly. "These women arrived this morning for the healing school and brought news I believed you should hear immediately." Vladislav gestured for her to continue, his expression softening slightly at her presence. "Tell the king what you told me," Anicia encouraged the elder of the two women, who twisted her woolen cap nervously in gnarled hands. "If it pleases Your Majesty," the woman began hesitantly. "I am Mirella from the village of Bran, near the southern pass. 3 days ago, armed men came through our village, led by nobles wearing the colors of Count Radu's house. They took our winter stores, grain, smoked meat, preserved fruits, claiming it was additional tax owed to the crown." Murmurs of outrage rippled through the council. Vladislav's expression darkened. "They said King Vladislav demanded these supplies to fund his new initiatives and his common-born queen's extravagances," the younger woman added, her voice stronger than her companion's. "But we knew this was false. The royal messengers who visited earlier spoke of Your Majesty's recovery and the Queen's healing school. They asked for nothing. So Radu steals from villagers in my name," Vladislav said, his voice dangerously quiet, "and adds the insult of blaming my queen for their suffering. Similar reports have come from 3 other villages," Anicia added. "Always the same pattern. Radu's men take food stores needed for winter survival, claiming royal authority while besmirching our names." The king turned to Captain Mihai. "How quickly can we dispatch supply wagons to these villages?" "Within the day, Your Majesty, though the snow will slow their progress." "See it done," Vladislav commanded. "Ensure each wagon bears the royal standard, and include a written declaration making it clear that Count Radu acted without crown authority." He returned his attention to the village women, his voice gentler. "You will be compensated for your losses, and your bravery in bringing this news will not be forgotten." After the women were escorted out with promises of shelter and provisions, Vladislav braced his hands against the table, his expression grim. Radu has overplayed his hand. Stealing from peasants in winter risks starvation. He does this to turn them against us, but we can use it to reveal his true nature. The villagers' suffering serves his purpose either way, Anisha observed quietly. If they starve, he blames us. If we aid them, he claims we coddle peasants while ignoring noble concerns. "What do you advise, my queen?" Vladislav asked, the question natural and unforced. Anisha considered before responding. "The nobles follow Radu and Dragos partly from genuine concern about your changing policies, but mostly from fear of losing privilege. If we could separate those motivated by principle from those motivated by greed and resentment. Divide them." Vladislav nodded thoughtfully. "Show that we can address legitimate concerns without surrendering to their demands." "Perhaps a royal progress," suggested Elder Dalka unexpectedly. When all eyes turned to her, she continued with growing confidence. "In my village, disputes are often resolved when the parties must face each other directly, not through messengers who might twist words. A progress through contested regions, in winter?" Master Ionescu looked skeptical. "The risk would be considerable, Your Majesty." "As would the impact," Mihai countered, warming to the idea. The king and queen traveling openly through the realm, hearing concerns directly, it would be unprecedented. Vladislav straightened, decision crystallizing in his mind. "Prepare for departure within 3 days. We will visit the affected villages first, then proceed to the larger towns. Radu and Dragos must be made to choose. Face their king openly or reveal themselves as cowards hiding behind stolen grain and false accusations." As the council dispersed to make preparations, Anisha remained beside her husband, her expression concerned. "Are you strong enough for such a journey? The wound is healed sufficiently," he interrupted gently, taking her hand. "And some pain is worth enduring for what must be done." "You've changed so much," she observed, studying his face. The Vladislav who made that drunken wager would never have considered meeting dissent with dialogue rather than force. A wry smile crossed his features. "That Vladislav was a fool in many ways, though I will admit, facing Radu and Dragos across a council table rather than a battlefield will require a different kind of courage." "The greater kind," Anisha assured him, squeezing his hand. "Any man can swing a sword. Few can truly listen to those who oppose them." Their intimate moment was interrupted by a thunderous crash as the great hall's doors burst open. Captain Mihai rushed in, his face grave. "Your Majesties, riders approach from the north, bearing the colors of Baron Dragos. They carry a white flag of parley, but they are armed." Vladislav's expression hardened instantly. "How many?" 20 horsemen, Mihai reported. "Their leader claims to carry a message for your ears alone. Have them escorted to the outer bailey," the king commanded. "I will hear this message, but with proper precautions. Double the guards on all walls and ensure the queen's safety." Anisha shook her head firmly. "I will stand with you." "Anisha," Vladislav began, his tone protective. "If this is a trap, then I face it at your side," she interrupted with quiet determination. "I am Queen of Wallachia, not a possession to be sheltered from reality." Something passed between them, a look of mutual respect and shared resolve. Finally, Vladislav nodded. "As you wish. But stay close to Mihai and his men." In the outer bailey, snow crunched beneath booted feet as the royal couple emerged from the keep. Guards lined the walls, bows at the ready. In the center of the courtyard, 20 mounted soldiers in Baron Dragos's colors waited, their breath and that of their horses creating clouds in the cold air. From among them a rider moved forward. To Vladislav's surprise, it was not a messenger but Baron Dragos himself, his aging face flushed from cold intention. "Your Majesty," Dragos called, offering a stiff bow from horseback. "I come under flag of truce to speak with my king." "You come armed to the home of the sovereign you claim to serve," Vladislav replied coolly. "Speak your peace, Baron." Dragos's eyes flickered briefly to Anisha, poorly disguised contempt in his gaze. "My message concerns matters of state, sire, perhaps more appropriately discussed in private." "The queen remains," Vladislav stated flatly. Whatever you would say to me, you may say before her. The Baron's jaw tightened, but he complied. Very well. I come representing several noble houses concerned about the direction of your Majesty's recent decrees. We seek assurances that the ancient rights and privileges of the nobility will be respected, despite these changes in governance. Is that why Radu's men steal winter provisions from peasant villages in my name? Vladislav asked, his voice dangerously soft. To protect noble privileges. Surprise flashed across Dragoș's face before he could mask it. I know nothing of such actions. If they occurred, they were not sanctioned by our coalition. A convenient denial, Anisha observed, her calm voice carrying clearly in the cold air. Yet the hungry children of those villages suffer regardless of who sanctioned their starvation. Dragoș's eyes narrowed at her intervention. With respect, Your Majesty, governance is complex. The common folk cannot understand. Hunger is not complex, Baron, she interrupted. Nor is injustice. Both are easily understood by even the simplest mind. A tense silence fell over the courtyard. Vladislav studied Dragoș thoughtfully, noting the uncertainty behind the Baron's bluster. You did not come merely to express concerns, Baron. What is it you truly seek? Dragoș straightened in his saddle. A return to traditional governance, sire. Dissolution of this common council you have formed. Restoration of nobles to their rightful advisory positions. He hesitated, then added with careful emphasis, and reconsideration of certain personal arrangements that have influenced these unfortunate changes. The implied reference to Anisha hung in the frigid air like a challenge. Vladislav felt cold rage building within him, the familiar violent anger that had once dominated his life. For a moment, he teetered on the edge of ordering Dragoș's immediate arrest, or worse. Then he felt Anisia's hand, warm and steady, touch his arm. The simple contact anchored him, bringing clarity where blind rage had threatened. You speak of tradition, Baron, Vladislav said finally, his voice controlled. Yet you forget the oldest tradition of all, that the crown rules by divine right, not noble permission. He stepped forward, his presence commanding despite the lack of physical intimidation he once relied upon. I will consider legitimate concerns about governance. I will hear petitions regarding specific issues, but I will not relinquish the reforms that strengthen Wallachia, nor will I entertain any suggestion regarding the Queen's position. Dragoș's face reddened. Then you leave us no choice but to choose your next words with exceptional care, Baron. Vladislav interrupted, steel beneath his quiet tone. Threats against the crown crossed the line from dissent to treason. A tense silence fell as the two men locked eyes across the snowy courtyard. Finally, Dragoș inclined his head stiffly. We seek resolution, not conflict, Your Majesty. Perhaps further discussion, in calmer circumstances. Indeed, Vladislav agreed, his tone making it clear the audience was ending. You may inform your coalition that the King and Queen will undertake a progress through the realm beginning 3 days hence. Those with legitimate grievances may present them directly. Those engaged in theft, intimidation, or slander will answer for their crimes. Dragoș's expression revealed both surprise and calculation. Clearly, this response was not what he had expected. A royal progress? In winter? Even in winter, a king must know his realm, Vladislav replied simply. You may go, Baron. The truce holds until sundown. As Dragoș and his men departed, Anisha turned to her husband. He came to assess your resolve, not to negotiate. And to see if rumors of my changed nature were true, Vladislav agreed, watching the riders disappear through the gate. He expected either the impulsive tyrant of old or a weakened puppet. Finding neither has confused him. What will they do now? She asked. Vladislav's gaze remained fixed on the horizon where dark clouds gathered, promising more snow by nightfall. They will argue among themselves, the cautious against the bold, the principled against the opportunistic. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining with practiced ease. And we will use that division to save what matters most. The kingdom? Anisha asked softly. The kingdom, he agreed, turning to meet her eyes. And us. The village of Bran welcomed the royal procession with a mixture of awe and trepidation. Children with wind-reddened cheeks lined the snowy pathway, staring wide-eyed at the mounted guards in their polished armor and the ornate carriage bearing the royal standard of Wallachia. Behind them, adults watched with more measured expressions, their faces bearing the weathered look of those who had learned that attention from nobility, even royal nobility, rarely boded well for simple folk. To their astonishment, King Vladislav himself emerged from the carriage, followed by Queen Anicia. The king wore practical riding clothes beneath a fur-lined cloak rather than ceremonial regalia. More surprising still was the queen, her simple blue dress and woolen cloak marking her as far less extravagant than rumor had suggested. "Your Majesties," greeted the village elder, a stooped man named Petru, dropping to one knee despite his obvious discomfort. "Bran welcomes you, though we have little to offer worthy of royal guests." "Rise, Elder Petru," Vladislav commanded, his voice carrying across the village square. "We come not to tax your hospitality, but to restore what was wrongfully taken." At his signal, the wagons following the royal carriage moved forward. Captain Mihai directed his men to begin unloading sacks of grain, preserved meats, and winter vegetables. "These provisions replace what was stolen in our name," Anicia explained, stepping forward to stand beside her husband. "No child in Wallachia should go hungry, while false representatives claim royal authority for theft." Murmurs spread through the gathering villagers, their expressions shifting from wariness to cautious hope. A woman pushed forward, Mirella, who had brought news of the theft to Sigashora. "You came yourself," she said, wonder in her voice. "We never thought—" She broke off, seemingly uncertain whether her directness might offend. "A king should see with his own eyes," Vladislav replied simply, "and a queen should hear with her own ears. How else can we truly know our people's needs?" The royal couple spent the day in Bran, not holding formal court, but moving among the villagers, listening to concerns that ranged from taxation to wolf attacks on livestock. Anicia gathered local women in the village hall, discussing healing herbs that grew in the region, and inviting the most knowledgeable to attend her school when spring made travel easier. As dusk approached, villagers lit torches and bonfires, creating islands of warmth and light against the winter darkness. Musicians appeared with simple instruments, a shepherd's flute, a crude fiddle, hand drums, and began playing traditional melodies that had accompanied Wallachian winters for generations. "You should dance, Your Majesties," suggested Elder Petru, emboldened by the day's unprecedented events. "In Bran, we believe those who dance together in winter share warmth through the coldest nights." Vladislav hesitated, conscious of his still tender back and his lifelong disdain for such common festivities. Then he felt Anicia's hand slip into his, a gentle question in her touch. "I'm not certain I remember how," he admitted quietly to her. "It has been many years since I joined such celebrations." "Then I shall remind you," she replied with a smile. "The steps are in your blood, even if forgotten by your mind." To the astonishment of villagers and royal guards alike, the king and queen stepped into the circle of firelight. Anicia guided Vladislav through the simple folk dance, her movements confident and graceful despite her full figure. After initial stiffness, the king found himself remembering the patterns of his youth, before crown and responsibility had separated him from such simple pleasures. As they danced, something remarkable happened throughout the village square. The barrier between royalty and commoners, a wall as old as Wallachia itself, seemed to waver and thin. Village women joined the circle, then men, until the entire square filled with dancers moving in ancient patterns around the bonfires. From the shadows beyond the firelight, Captain Mihai watched with alert eyes, his hand never far from his sword. He had argued against this progress, considering it too dangerous with rebellious nobles still gathering strength. Yet seeing the villagers' response, he began to understand the wisdom behind the risk. Later, as the royal party prepared to depart for their next destination, Elder Petru approached the king once more. "Word will spread of what happened here today," the old man said, his voice low. "Count Radu has ears in every village." "Good," Vladislav replied. Let him hear how his king treats those he wronged in royal name. He will not take this lightly, your majesty. I am counting on it, the king said, clasping the elder's shoulder in a gesture of surprising familiarity. Choose trustworthy men to guard these provisions, Petru. And remember, you answer to the crown, not to Count Radu or any other noble who would claim authority over these lands. As their carriage rolled away from Bran, Anesia observed her husband's thoughtful expression in the lantern light. You're pleased with today's outcome? Beyond expectation, Vladislav admitted. I've spent my life viewing commoners as subjects to be ruled, not people to be understood. Their resilience surprises me. They are more like you than you realize, she said softly. Survivors who do what must be done day after day, without recognition or reward. He took her hand, his thumb tracing the calluses that no amount of royal luxury had yet softened. As are you, my queen. The royal progress continued through 6 more villages over the next week, each stop following a similar pattern: the distribution of provisions, open discussions with villagers, shared meals and celebrations. With each village, the reception grew warmer as word spread ahead of their arrival. In the 7th village, however, the pattern broke. As the royal carriage crested the final hill overlooking the settlement, Captain Mihai rode forward in alarm. Your Majesty, something is wrong. There are armed men in the village square, not village militia, but trained soldiers. Vladislav leaned out the carriage window, his experienced eye confirming Mihai's assessment. Count Radu's colors, he observed grimly. It seems our rebellious count has decided to confront us directly. We should turn back, Mihai urged. We have only 30 guards. If those are Radu's men, we continue forward. Vladislav interrupted, his voice calm but firm. Turning back now would be seen as weakness or fear. Neither serves our purpose. Anesia studied the village below, counting the visible soldiers. There appear to be fewer than 20 men. Not an ambush force, but a message. My thoughts exactly, Vladislav agreed. Mihai, form honor guard position. We enter openly with dignity, but remain alert. As the royal procession entered the village, the tension was palpable. Unlike previous welcomes, no children lined the path, no villagers gathered in doorways. Instead, Radu's soldiers stood in formation around a familiar figure seated on horseback in the center of the square. Count Radu himself. Your Majesty, the Count called as the royal carriage halted. His tone carried exaggerated deference that bordered on mockery. What an unexpected pleasure to find you traveling among the common folk in such intimate fashion. Vladislav descended from the carriage, offering his hand to assist Anesia before turning to face Radu. Not unexpected, I think. Word of our progress has traveled faster than our horses. Indeed. Radu's gaze shifted to Anesia, cold assessment in his eyes. And your Majesty brings the Queen to these humble settings. How democratic you've become. Where are the villagers, Count Radu? Anesia asked directly, ignoring his barely veiled insult. Why do we find your soldiers instead of the people who live here? For their protection, of course, Radu replied smoothly. These are dangerous times. Rebels and malcontents spread lies about their rightful lords. I merely ensure the king receives accurate information from reliable sources. By hiding those who might speak uncomfortable truths? Vladislav's voice remained controlled, but his eyes hardened, a curious form of protection. Radu shifted in his saddle, his composure slipping slightly. Your Majesty misunderstands. The villagers are simply occupied with their duties. Winter brings much work. Release them, Vladislav commanded flatly. Now. The Count's face flushed at the direct order. For a tense moment, it seemed he might refuse. Then, with deliberate slowness, he raised a hand, signaling to his men. One soldier moved toward a large barn at the edge of the square, unbarring its heavy door. Villagers emerged hesitantly, blinking in the winter sunlight. Their expressions registered fear, then confusion, and finally astonishment as they recognized the royal visitors. Your king wishes to speak with you, Radu announced, his voice carrying forced joviality that fooled no one. See how he honors your humble village with his presence. An elderly woman stepped forward, her weathered face showing more courage than caution. "We heard you were coming, Your Majesty. Count Radu's men arrived at dawn to prepare us for your visit." "Preparation that included confinement?" Vladislav asked, his gaze never leaving Radu's increasingly uncomfortable face. "They said we needed instruction on proper behavior before royalty," another villager added, emboldened by the king's evident displeasure with the count. "That we shouldn't trouble you with complaints about taxes or the grain they took last month." Radu's hand moved to his sword hilt. "These peasants exaggerate, Your Majesty. A simple misunderstanding." "Enough." Vladislav's voice cut through the excuses like a blade. "Captain Mihai, escort Count Radu and his men to the village boundary. They will await us there." "You cannot dismiss me from my own lands," Radu protested, genuine outrage breaking through his diplomatic veneer. "These are not your lands, Count. They are Wallachian lands, under my crown." Vladislav stepped closer to Radu's horse, his presence commanding despite the Count's elevated position. "You serve at my pleasure, a fact you seem to have forgotten." The tension in the square crackled like the winter air itself. Radu's soldiers glanced nervously between their lord and the royal guards, clearly uncertain whether to obey the king or remain loyal to their immediate master. Anicia moved forward then, her calm voice diffusing the dangerous moment. "Surely Count Radu wishes to demonstrate his loyalty by honoring his king's request. A brief withdrawal would allow these good people to speak freely, after which we can all discuss Wallachia's future more productively." Her diplomatic framing offered Radu a path to compliance without public humiliation. After a moment's calculation, the Count inclined his head stiffly. "As Her Majesty suggests," he conceded, though his eyes remained cold. "We will await your pleasure beyond the village, sire." As Radu and his men departed under Mihai's watchful eye, the villagers gathered closer, their initial fear giving way to cautious hope. "Now," Vladislav said, turning to the assembled people, "tell us the truth of how things stand in this village, without fear of consequence." The stories poured forth then, tales of increasing taxation, confiscated livestock, young men pressed into service in Radu's growing militia. As he listened, Vladislav's expression remained carefully neutral, but Anicia could see the anger building behind his composed exterior. When the villagers finished speaking, the king addressed them with quiet authority. "What has happened here will not continue. You have my word as your sovereign." "But when you leave, sire," the elderly woman said hesitantly, "Count Radu remains." "Not for long," Vladislav promised. "Change comes to Wallachia, not just in the castle, but throughout the realm." As they departed the village later that afternoon, Anicia noted her husband's unusually quiet demeanor. "You're troubled by what we found." "Not troubled," he corrected. "Resolved. Radu has shown his true colors, not a principled opponent but a petty tyrant who abuses those under his protection." His hand found hers in the dimness of the carriage. The time for diplomatic gestures has passed. "What will you do?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. Vladislav's gaze turned to the snow-covered landscape beyond the carriage window, his expression hardening into the determination that had once made him feared throughout the kingdom. "End this," he said simply, "once and for all." The great hall of Sigashora Castle hummed with tension as nobles from across Wallachia gathered at King Vladislav's command. Braziers blazed against the winter chill, their flames casting dramatic shadows across the ancient stone walls where generations of rulers had held court. Guards stood at attention along both sides of the hall, their hands resting meaningfully on sword hilts. At the far end upon the dais sat Vladislav and Anicia on matching thrones, hers slightly smaller but positioned at equal height, a deliberate statement not lost on the assembled nobility. The king wore formal attire befitting the occasion, though notably absent was the golden coronet he typically donned for state functions. Instead, he appeared as a man rather than a symbol, powerful in his own right, needing no adornment to command respect. Count Radu and Baron Dragos stood before the dais, their expressions carefully controlled, despite the public nature of this confrontation. Behind them, two distinct groups had formed, those nobles openly aligned with the rebellion, and those who had remained loyal to the crown, or at least neutral in the growing conflict. "My lords and ladies of Wallachia," Vladislav began, his voice carrying throughout the hall without effort. "I have summoned you today to address matters that can no longer be settled through proxies or messengers. The kingdom stands at a crossroads, and choices made in this hall will determine its path for generations to come." He rose from his throne, his movements deliberate and controlled. "For 3 weeks the Queen and I have traveled throughout the realm, visiting villages large and small, speaking directly with people from every station. What we found disturbs us greatly." Anisha remained seated, her calm presence a counterpoint to her husband's intensity. Her eyes, however, never left Count Radu's face as Vladislav continued. "In villages under Count Radu's authority, we found people confined during our visit, instructed on what they could and could not say to their king. We found evidence of excessive taxation, confiscation of winter provisions, and forced conscription into private militias." His gaze shifted to Baron Dragos. "In your territories, Baron, we discovered similar abuses, though more carefully disguised." "These are outrageous accusations, Your Majesty," Dragos protested. "Peasants exaggerate their hardships to curry royal favor." "Do they exaggerate the empty grain stores we saw with our own eyes?" Vladislav countered. "Do they invent the marks of beatings we witnessed on those who dared speak against their lords?" Radu stepped forward, his composure fraying slightly. "Sire, you have been misled by common rabble who understand nothing of governance. Strong measures are sometimes necessary to maintain order, especially when the throne itself seems unstable." A dangerous silence fell at this near-treasonous statement. Captain Mihai's hand moved to his sword, but Vladislav raised a hand to stay him. "Unstable," the king repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "Because I no longer drink myself into oblivion. Because I listen to counsel beyond the same 5 noble families who have whispered in royal ears for generations. Because I married a woman who sees more clearly than any advisor I've ever known." He descended the steps of the dais slowly, moving to stand directly before Radu. Though the count was taller, Vladislav's presence seemed to fill more space, his controlled intensity more intimidating than his former rage had ever been. "Tell me, Count Radu, what makes a kingdom truly stable? Is it nobles growing fat on peasant labor while villages starve? Is it laws that protect the privileged while punishing the powerless? Is it a king who rules through fear rather than wisdom?" Radu swallowed visibly but held his ground. "Tradition brings stability, Your Majesty, the natural order that has sustained Wallachia through centuries of threat and change." "Tradition," Vladislav echoed thoughtfully. "Yet traditions begin somewhere, do they not? Once they were new ideas, resisted by those who came before." He turned, addressing the wider assembly. "The tradition you speak of began with my ancestors, who established this kingdom through strength and vision. They did not preserve what came before. They created something new." His voice strengthened with conviction. "As king, it falls to me to determine which traditions serve Wallachia and which have become chains binding us to past mistakes." Anisha rose then, joining her husband on the floor of the great hall. Her simple movement drew all eyes, her quiet dignity a stark contrast to the agitation building among the nobles. "My lords and ladies," she addressed them directly, her voice clear and steady. "I have seen your lands through the eyes of those who work them. I have heard your people's voices, their fears and hopes. They do not speak of wanting a new lord or a different king. They speak of justice, of fair treatment, of enough food to survive the winter." She moved to stand beside Vladislav, neither behind nor before him. "What threatens Wallachia is not change, but the suffering that comes when leaders forget whom they serve." Baron Dragos scoffed openly. "Nobles serve the crown, woman. Peasants serve nobles. That is the natural order." "And whom does the crown serve, Baron?" Vladislav asked quietly. The question hung in the air, unanswered and deeply uncomfortable. "I will tell you," the king continued after a moment. "The crown serves Wallachia, not merely its noble houses, but every soul who calls this land home. A truth I myself forgot for too many years." He returned to the dais, retrieving a scroll that had lain beside his throne. "After careful consideration and consultation with my council, both noble and common-born, I have drafted a new charter for governance of this realm. Murmurs spread through the hall as Vladislav unrolled the document. This charter establishes a permanent council that includes voices from all segments of Wallachian society. It limits the authority of nobles over their territories and creates royal inspectors to ensure fair taxation and treatment of common folk. "This is unprecedented," Radu exclaimed, unable to contain himself. "You would strip nobles of rights held since the kingdom's founding." "I would balance rights with responsibilities," Vladislav corrected. "Those who govern justly will find little changes. Those who abuse their authority will find it curtailed." He surveyed the assembly, noting the varying reactions: outrage from some, thoughtful consideration from others, relief from a few. "Each of you faces a choice today," the king declared. "Accept these changes and continue serving Wallachia under new governance, or reject them and forfeit your lands and titles." The hall erupted in shocked exclamations. Radu's face flushed crimson with fury. "This is tyranny. You cannot simply seize noble lands." "I do not seize them," Vladislav replied calmly. "I offer a choice between adaptation and retirement. Those who cannot govern under these new principles are welcome to retain their personal wealth and live as private citizens, either here or abroad." He turned to Dragos, whose expression had shifted from outrage to calculation. "Consider carefully, Baron. Is your privilege worth civil war? For that is what continued resistance will bring, not a return to past governance, but bloodshed that serves no one." Anicia spoke again, her words directed not at the rebellious lords, but at the uncertain nobles watching from the sidelines. "Many of you have governed your lands with fairness and wisdom. These changes will strengthen your ability to serve your people, not diminish it. A stable Wallachia benefits all, noble and common alike." A silver-haired noblewoman stepped forward from the assembly, Countess Mara, whose northern territories were known for their prosperity and contented populace. "I have questions about this charter, Your Majesty," she said, her voice measured. "Concerns about implementation and specifics of these new councils." "Questions I welcome, Countess," Vladislav replied. "The details can and should be refined through thoughtful discussion." "Then I am willing to consider this new path," she declared, to audible gasps from some of her peers, "provided my questions receive satisfactory answers." Her statement broke the unified opposition. Other nobles stepped forward with their own questions and conditional acceptance. As the momentum shifted, Radu's face darkened with the realization that his coalition was crumbling. "You'll regret this weakness," he hissed to a baron who had just expressed willingness to accept the charter. "When the peasants rise up, emboldened by these concessions—" "The only rising I see," Vladislav interrupted coldly, "comes from lords who value power above duty." He fixed Radu with a penetrating stare. "Make your choice, Count, adaptation or retirement." Radu's hand moved to his sword hilt, a reflexive gesture immediately met by the sound of royal guards drawing their weapons. For a moment, violence hung in the air like winter frost, sharp and dangerous. Then Anicia stepped between them, unarmed and unafraid. "Enough. Wallachia has seen too much bloodshed in its history. Let today be remembered for wisdom, not more violence." Something in her calm courage deflated Radu's rage. His hand fell away from his weapon, though his expression remained defiant. "I will make no choice today," he declared. "I require time to consider these proposals." 3 days, Vladislav granted. "Then you will swear fealty to the new charter or surrender your title and lands. The same applies to all present." He raised his voice to address the entire assembly. "Copies of the charter will be provided to each of you. My council, both old members and new, will be available to address your questions and concerns." As the assembly broke into smaller groups, with nobles clustering to discuss this unexpected turn of events, Vladislav and Anicia withdrew to a small antechamber adjacent to the Great Hall. Captain Mihai stationed guards at the door before joining them. "That was boldly done, Your Majesty," Mihai observed, "though I fear Radu will not surrender so easily." "Nor do I expect him to," Vladislav agreed, the public mask of absolute confidence slipping slightly now that they were private. "He will use these 3 days to rally whatever support remains, perhaps even attempt something desperate. Anesia poured water from a silver pitcher, offering cups to both men. He looked cornered, dangerous. Which is why security must be doubled throughout the castle, Vladislav instructed Mihai, particularly around the queen's chambers. I can protect myself, Anesia protested mildly. Vladislav's expression softened as he took her hand. Indulge my concern, if not my command. Radu blames you above all for the changes in me and in Wallachia. A man with nothing left to lose might seek vengeance where he can find it. She squeezed his hand in acquiescence. Very well, but remember that I survived many years before royal guards watched over my sleep. Mihai departed to arrange the additional security, leaving the royal couple alone in the quiet chamber. Vladislav moved to the narrow window, gazing out at the winter landscape beyond. Do you think it will work? Anesia asked softly, coming to stand beside him. This charter, this new beginning? I think it must, he replied, his voice revealing a vulnerability he showed to no one else. The old ways brought us to the brink of civil war. They made me a tyrant and left our people suffering. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. I cannot return to that, Anesia. Not after seeing Wallachia and myself through your eyes. She reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his cheek. The king I met that first night would never have imagined offering nobles a choice rather than demanding obedience. The king you met that first night was a fool, Vladislav said softly. Drunk on wine and power, blind to what truly matters. And what truly matters now? She asked, though something in her eyes suggested she already knew the answer. He drew her closer, his voice barely above a whisper. A kingdom worth preserving, a life worth living, and a woman who saw possibility where others saw only a drunken tyrant making a mockery of marriage. Their lips met in a kiss that spoke of transformation, of a journey neither had expected but both now treasured beyond measure. Outside, snow began to fall once more, covering Sigashora in a blanket of pristine white that hinted at new beginnings and paths yet to be traveled. Spring arrived in Wallachia with a gentle determination, melting the mountain snows and coaxing green shoots from the earth. 5 years had passed since the great council where King Vladislav had presented his charter, transforming governance throughout the realm. Those years had brought both challenge and triumph, rebellion from some quarters, acceptance from others, and gradual stabilization as the new systems took root. In the royal gardens of Sigashora Castle, Vladislav sat on a stone bench watching Anesia tend to her expansive herb collection. The garden had been her first request after the charter's implementation, a place where she could cultivate healing plants and teach others their properties. Now it flourished as a living testament to her philosophy, beauty and utility growing side by side, neither diminishing the other. At 44, Vladislav retained the commanding presence that had defined his earlier reign, but the harsh edges had softened. Silver now dominated his once dark hair, and lines of experience rather than rage marked his face. He watched his wife work with unguarded tenderness, marveling still at how completely she had transformed his life. You're staring again, Anesia observed without looking up from the rosemary she was harvesting. At 42, she remained full-figured, unapologetically herself. The years had added subtle touches of gray to her chestnut hair and fine lines around her eyes that deepened when she smiled, which was far more often now than when they'd first met. A king may look where he pleases, Vladislav replied, the familiar teasing undercutting any hint of the arrogant monarch he had once been. And a queen may tell him when his staring disrupts her concentration. She countered, finally turning to face him with eyes that sparkled with humor and affection. He rose, crossing the short distance between them to take her soil-stained hands in his. Something arrived today from the eastern provinces, he said. News I thought you would want to hear immediately. Anesia's expression grew serious. The orphanage. Has there been trouble? Quite the opposite. His smile widened. The first class of children has completed their education. 27 orphans who might once have died from neglect or lived as beggars are now apprenticed to trades or continuing scholarly pursuits. The headmistress sent a detailed report of each child's progress. Joy illuminated Anesia's face. The network of orphanages throughout Wallachia had been her most passionate project, one she had championed through opposition and financial constraints. "Let me see," she insisted, setting aside her basket of herbs and brushing dirt from her hands. Vladislav produced a rolled parchment from his tunic. "I've only read the beginning myself. I wanted to share the rest with you." They sat together on the stone bench, heads bent close as they read the headmistress's account of children rescued from desperate circumstances who had flourished under proper care and education. Names and stories flowed across the parchment: a girl now apprenticed to a master silversmith, a boy showing remarkable aptitude for mathematics, twins who had developed new techniques for dyeing wool. "They would have been lost," Anisha said softly, her finger tracing a line detailing a particularly remarkable transformation. "All this potential, all these lives, simply lost." "Like so much else before you came," Vladislav observed, his voice carrying a rare note of vulnerability. "Myself included." She looked up at him, her expression softening. "You were never lost, merely walking a different path." "A path to destruction," he amended, "for myself and Wallachia, which you had the courage to abandon when shown another way." She touched his face gently. Few men with power are willing to change so fundamentally. Before he could respond, the garden gate opened to admit Captain Mihai, now commander of the royal forces. The years had added silver to his temples as well, but his bearing remained as military precise as ever. "Forgive the interruption, your majesties," he said with a respectful bow. "The children have returned from the village and are asking for you both." Vladislav's expression brightened immediately. "Where are they?" "In the east courtyard, sire. They appear to have acquired several puppies during their excursion, despite clear instructions to the contrary." Mihai's stern face betrayed a hint of amusement. "Lady Elena is attempting to restore order with limited success." Anisha laughed. "Heaven help poor Elena. We'd better rescue her before she resigns her position." As they walked through the castle corridors, the sounds of childish laughter and yipping puppies grew louder. They emerged into the sunny courtyard to find a scene of cheerful chaos. Two children, a boy of 10 and a girl of 8, were attempting to corral 3 squirming puppies while Lady Elena, once one of the Queen's harshest critics and now the children's devoted guardian, looked on with exasperated affection. "Papa! Mama!" the children cried in unison, abandoning their canine charges to race toward the royal couple. Vladislav caught the boy in a fierce embrace, lifting him off his feet despite the protests that he was too big now for such treatment. Anisha knelt to receive the girl's enthusiastic hug, laughing as a streak of mud transferred from child to royal dress. "Nikolai, Mirella," Vladislav addressed them with mock sternness. "I believe Commander Mihai mentioned something about puppies that were expressly forbidden?" Nikolai, dark-haired and confident like his adoptive father, stood his ground. "They were starving, Papa. Their mother died, and the village boys were throwing stones at them. We couldn't leave them," added Mirella, her gentle heart so like Anisha's. "It wouldn't have been right." Vladislav and Anisha exchanged a glance over the children's heads, a look that encompassed 5 years of shared parenthood and the unexpected joy it had brought them both. "Well," the king said finally, his severe expression melting, "I suppose we must inspect these rescued creatures before deciding their fate." The children led them eagerly to where the puppies tumbled over each other in a corner of the courtyard. They were mongrels of indeterminate breed, with oversized paws that suggested they would grow into substantial dogs. "They'll make excellent hunting hounds," Nikolai declared with the confidence of youth. "Or guard dogs, very fierce." As if to disprove this assessment, one puppy rolled onto its back, paws waving helplessly in the air, while another chased its own tail in dizzying circles. "Very fierce indeed," Vladislav agreed solemnly, though his eyes danced with suppressed laughter. "Terrifying, even." Lady Elena approached, having recovered her composure. "I apologize, your majesties. They insisted on bringing the creatures home before consulting you." "It's quite all right, Elena," Anisha assured her. "Compassion needs no prior consultation." As the children returned to their puppies, Vladislav drew Anisha aside, his expression growing reflective. "Did you ever imagine this?" he asked quietly. "That night when you entered my hall with your basket of herbs, Did you envision any of what has come to pass? She considered his question seriously. I imagined survival, she admitted. Perhaps some measure of respect eventually. But this? Her gaze swept across the courtyard, taking in their adopted children. The castle that had become a true home. The kingdom transformed under their joint care. No, this I could never have imagined. Nor I, Vladislav agreed. I thought myself complete. A king with power, wealth, and the fear of his subjects. I never recognized the emptiness until you filled it. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the sounds of childish laughter and playful puppies. So much had changed since that fateful night. Not just for them personally, but for all of Wallachia. The kingdom still faced challenges, of course. Not all nobles had accepted the new charter willingly. Count Radu had chosen exile rather than submission, joining other malcontents beyond the eastern borders. Droughts, harsh winters, and occasional border skirmishes tested the new systems of governance. Yet through it all, the partnership forged between the unlikely royal couple had provided a foundation strong enough to weather each storm. Their complementary strengths, his decisive leadership tempered by her compassionate wisdom, had created something neither could have achieved alone. I received another letter today, Vladislav said after a moment. From Baron Dragos. Anicia looked up in surprise. After initially rejecting the charter, Dragos had eventually accepted its terms, though reluctantly. What does he want? To sponsor 3 village children for the Royal Academy, Vladislav replied, still somewhat bemused by this development. He writes that his estate has prospered under the new taxation system, and he wishes to, as he puts it, invest in Wallachia's future mines. Anicia's eyes widened. Dragos? The same man who once called me a witch and common usurper? The very same. Vladislav shook his head in wonder. People can change, it seems, as I have reason to know better than most. She smiled. The most profound changes come not from force, but from example. You've shown the nobility that strength can coexist with compassion, that tradition can evolve without being destroyed. We have shown them, he corrected gently. Every change began with you, Anicia, with the woman I married on a drunken whim, who became the conscience and heart of a kingdom. From across the courtyard, Nikolai called for their attention, eager to demonstrate how well the puppies were already responding to his attempts at training. The royal couple moved to join their children, hand in hand as they had been increasingly in public over the years, a visual representation of their united approach to both family and kingdom. Later that evening, after the children were asleep and the puppies settled in the stables, temporarily Vladislav insisted, though Anicia had her doubts about this claim, the king and queen stood on their private balcony overlooking Sigashora. The castle torches cast golden light across the town below, where homes and shops spread outward from the central fortress like ripples in a pond. Do you know what day it is? Vladislav asked, his arm around Anicia's waist as they gazed at the peaceful scene. She leaned against him, comfortable in the familiarity of his embrace. The first day of spring. Yes, but also the anniversary of the night we met. His voice carried a hint of wonder still, even after all these years. The night I made the best mistake of my life. Anicia laughed softly. Is that how you see it? A fortunate error? I see it as the moment fate took matters into its own hands, he replied thoughtfully. I was too blind, too arrogant to recognize what I truly needed. So destiny arranged for you to walk through those doors at precisely the right moment. With my basket of herbs for the royal physician, she remembered. Terrified, but determined not to show it. And now? Vladislav turned her gently to face him, his eyes searching hers in the soft evening light. Now, Anicia said, her voice steady and true, I am exactly where I belong, with the man I love, the children we cherish, and the kingdom we serve together. He kissed her then, a gesture that had evolved over the years from tentative exploration to confident affirmation of their enduring bond. When they parted, Vladislav rested his forehead against hers in a moment of quiet intimacy. The drunken king and his unexpected queen, he murmured. Who would have believed such a beginning could lead to this? Aeneas smiled. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson in our story. That true transformation of a person, a marriage, or a kingdom often begins in the most unlikely moments. Below them, Wallachia settled into peaceful slumber, a realm transformed not by decree alone, but by the powerful example of its ruler's own journey from reluctant arrangement to genuine love. And in the royal chambers of Sigishora Castle, King Vladislav and Queen Anicia, once strangers thrust together by impulse and chance, found continued wonder in the life they had built together, one choice, one day, 1 year at a time.